and thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time. We know it can be busy, but we think that this ongoing series of webinars that we're doing is very important for our clients in the mid-market, or potential clients in the mid-market, and really anybody who's facing the challenges that many small and mid-sized organizations today are facing with wrestling and tackling the complexities of business automation. Today's session, we're going to be focusing on how the use of cloud software can help reduce the IT costs and complexity. And really the foundation of this is built on the premise, or the basic question is, why am we typically seeing business owners and managers investing greater dollars into their IT infrastructure and IT assets, but yet not necessarily realizing the benefits of that investment? And we see that this is a common theme across the board, so we're real excited to really take a critical look at this. As an organization that makes its living implementing mid-market systems, we still do a tremendous amount of on-prem or traditional deployments. So our perspective really tends to be a little bit more agnostic and just taking a factual look and representation of what we see taking place in the industry. As I said, my name is Jory Weissman. I'm Vice President here at mybar.net, and I've been automating mid-market organizations for the past 25 years, really devoted my entire professional career to making that happen. And I think we can offer a unique perspective that sometimes is lost within the sales literature and rhetoric that's out there in the marketplace in general. So please, I've got everybody on mute, so we'll take questions via email, and this way it just makes it a lot easier, people putting others on hold and such. So we'll get through the subject matter, and hopefully you'll find it to be on point. So one of the first things we like to focus on is really what's today's agenda. And we know that there are a variety of different forces impacting the mid-market, requiring business owners to take a more aggressive posture when it comes to IT investment, not only in software, but certainly in business process. And as I alluded to, that spend doesn't always necessarily translate to greater business value. So we'll take a closer look at what these forces are that's compelling people to make these kinds of investments. We're also going to be looking at whether or not cloud computing is truly the answer. It's not right for everybody. There are certainly business dynamics that may make one style of deployment more preferred over another. But that said, there's no one-size-fits-all in this, and we really have to look individually at the business to see if it does make sense. And then finally, what we'll do is we're going to look at some of the numbers, real factual numbers. We're going to take a 5-year total cost of ownership analysis and really try to portray as accurately as is possible what the investment is like under each one of the scenarios. And again, given the particular circumstance, it may reveal some secrets and certainly some positive assets along the way. So we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible, and again, thanks for joining us. First thing we really want to do is look at some of the challenges that are facing today's business. We started with the opening thesis statement that people are typically investing more but are getting a little bit less out of that investment. And really what we're seeing is that the technological demands are driving this. Well, that's no great shock or surprise. Certainly being able to effectively communicate transactional information to our clients is of key importance. Being able to interact with them in a more immersive, more meaningful ways is certainly driving that need. That's what I like to call the Amazon effect, and in increasing customer expectations. Seeing that e-commerce has really taken off, and the way people are interacting with their business partners, whether it's you at home working with credit card companies or American Express and analyzing spend tracking and things like that, or doing online banking functions, the expectation that everybody has about interactions with different people that they're doing business with is growing exponentially. And so we have to, as business owners, be able to offer something more than basic business processing. Obviously early computing dealt with transactional efficiencies, and today it's really more about not only informational efficiencies, but how efficiently are we sharing that information, and beyond that, how pleasant is the experience, how immersive is the experience. These are all key factors that successful businesses are trying to meet head-on. Even tried and true businesses that are rethinking their model because they've got competition coming from formerly suppliers and now competitors in the space. People going in a direct-to-consumer is really starting to disenfranchise a lot of mid-market distribution companies, so they have to incorporate assets with a bit more agility than even some of their large-scale vendors are not able to achieve. These are compelling stories. There's also the fact that the service sector is growing enormously, and how are we going to effectively manage, dispatch, control our staff activities, be able to record time and expenses, being able to do things real-time and in the field. These are expectations that are being set by consumers and by competitors alike, and we must find ways of dealing with that. So we know that complexity is through the roof. That's probably an understatement, but bringing that all together, you can be looking to make these investments, and we speak to so many people out there that are making the investments, and they're calling us 6, 8, or 10 months later, just never really realizing the value, never getting more out of the system, or proportionally more out of the system than what they've put into it. We thought it was important to address these topics. And one of the things that really drives this is that each of these new areas of functionality that a business must work through have, or we can call them particular silos of business process or silos of information. You can meet some of these challenges manually, right? So you can staff somebody to keep track of new leads in, or so many people do sales forecasts today on spreadsheets, if at all. Sometimes it's the back of napkins. But yet these can be manually maintained processes, and we can certainly fill a business need, certainly an internal need, and not necessarily going to communicate it effectively to customers, but certainly internal needs could be met that way. But there is a cost associated to doing that. There's a cost to having people on various versions of the truth as opposed to an integrated solution. And that's really what this is all about. Core business processing of invoicing and financial management and inventory management, that really hasn't changed, excuse me, really hasn't changed all that much over the past 15 or 20 years. But what has changed is some of the higher level business processes that are sometimes maintained offline as adjunctive to those specific functions, or things that people never did before, such as e-commerce. So we're going to take a look at some of these costs and what's driving this change. We talk about the fact that businesses now really have to master a multitude of functionality, have to have the right product there, have to have our service technician on site when expected, have to communicate these activities to the customers both before, during, and after in order for that satisfaction to be where it needs to be. And so we now have to start to entertain expanding the scope and functionality of our business processes. And typical scenarios might look like dealing with an e-commerce or inventory management. And then we have to have specialized order management and financials. And of course, there's marketing and fulfillment and purchasing and the communication tools. And let's not forget our sales team and CRM. As you can see, that bringing this all together requires traditionally infrastructure, servers, and IT presence that really makes this into a multi-headed monster. And as frightening as this image might be, it really is the truth. I mean, how many of you have business systems that could potentially look like this? Now, if they're not all required, then obviously that may reduce the efficacy of some of the cloud solutions that we're going to discuss. But I would bet better than even money that several of you on the phone today have at least 4 or 5 of these processing areas within their business that either need improvement or completely not addressed at all, but really are part of the overall strategy. And unfortunately, traditionally, when doing this with on-premise solutions, resulted in what we call the proverbial hairball of integration. Being able to take a distribution package or a QuickBooks financial application and our Salesforce or e-commerce and web all working together creates spaghetti code, which creates that hairball that is often difficult to maintain, certainly very costly to maintain. And again, because the time to market to bring something like this to real value takes so darn long that the technology becomes obsoleted even before you get a chance to leverage and utilize it. So the truth is, each of these systems that we've represented in the prior screens not only need to be there, but they need to be technologically sophisticated. And as I said earlier, you can maintain some of this information in silos external, such as my theoretical marketing lists or sales forecasts and projections. But chances are, if your business is on a growth curve, those just become untenable, and the cost of maintaining that inaccurate information, or largely inaccurate information, is quite high. And of course, not having them, as bad as having them and not working, both erode your profitability. So why are cloud-based systems lower cost and tend to be a little bit more efficient? Well, number one, because they are all-inclusive relative to the database, they eliminate the middleware and the integration layers that you typically see. The cost of all of those lines of wires in that hairball is expensive. And of course, I've been talking the term single version of the truth, but isn't it wonderful to imagine a scenario where sales and marketing, or production management and distribution and shipping are all on the same platform, not as an integrated platform, but as a unified platform, a singular database that does not require any integration to take place. And that's really the benefit we're talking about within cloud. Not only that, there tends to be a bit more in the box, because these variables work cooperatively together. By design, there's a greater breadth and scope of functionality that we see within modern ERP cloud solutions than could possibly be contained in an on-premise solution. And there are some technical reasons for that. On-premise solutions certainly require different versions of operating systems. We discussed this in detail in our first presentation from last month. But there is just so much in the way of infrastructure that needs to be right in order for all of this stuff to work. It becomes difficult for the ERP manufacturers of on-premise solutions to put more into the box. But yet, this is a challenge that could be met in a multi-tenant cloud environment. The other thing that's, of course, important, data protection. And managing and maintaining our database has become a full-time job. And it's not just because we have rogue states or governments or anybody else in the hacking community really at risk, but there's so much malware and antivirus and the threats of ransomware debilitating and crippling on-premise servers is really, really a scary proposition. And in spite of what people may think, that the business information is safer within my own four walls, well, the facts really are not that. The facts are that the information is far safer in a well-managed, highly secure, maintained database environment, and certainly done at a much, much lower cost. So data protection, automated failover, and backup, when we look at our TCO analysis, we're going to take a very modest view, a very modest picture of the costs associated to doing that, but I can tell you that when you really look at the facts, data protection and the failover assets that are available in the cloud really make a very compelling story. And one of my favorites is the zero-cost updates. As I mentioned earlier, on-premise solutions have to deal with a lot of different considerations. What versions of the operating system, what versions of the Windows server, what versions of the browser, all of these things come into play in terms of how the software can function. Well, something that runs super thin in the cloud basically has none of those restrictions, right? All the server assets are being well maintained and perfectly aligned with the functionality of the software. So what you're seeing is not only zero-cost updates, but more frequent updates. So in a typical cloud ERP deployment, you can expect to see at least an upgrade of functionality every 12 to 18 months is possible, some certainly more frequent than that. But the most important thing, that it is what I like to call a passive upgrade, meaning that we have to do no special planning as you might on an on-prem solution, no special testing or considerations other than giving the new users, or the new functionality rather, some exposure to the users so that they can take advantage of that. I think when you look at all of these things combined, that's where the total cost of ownership story becomes very, very compelling. Sometimes people get caught up in the monthly expense associated to cloud and really fail to look at all of the downstream costs that they're going to encounter. So we call it a modern must-have, right? And I think one of the things that we want to talk about here is having that unified database that has full ERP, which can consist of not only supply chain, but services, professional services, and field services. Of course, the CRM, which means a lot. It could be CRM, it can be marketing, and the e-commerce also means a lot. It could be business to business, it could be business to consumer, it could be customer portals, enabling your customers to not necessarily place transactional orders with you, but enabling them with information, right? A secure way to communicate with you, product quality issues, customer service related issues, being able to visualize outstanding invoices, make payments online. A lot of these assets can be deployed without ever thinking about a traditional e-commerce. But then again, if you need to, you also want to have a solution that has that built in. The other thing that, aside from addressing more functional areas, is that we want to be able to create an environment where business executives and business decision makers can visualize the data across and down the organization. So all of these disparate silos, whether it's CRM or e-com, that's easy, but even within supply chain execution, fulfillment rates, and warehouse operations and logistics, and demand and supply planning, all of these have a factor associated to that. So when looking at something like this, where we have a more comprehensive solution, one of the things we'd like to point out is potentially looking at key performance indicators so that a particular role might be interested in, whether it's pipeline or new leads or web orders, or being able to look more CRM-centric at phone calls and tasks or events, truly immersive capability that would normally be reserved within a CRM system, coexisting and living right side by side with your accounts payable or your sales orders or open order requirements, really creating a scenario where the two systems are married at a level that integration could not possibly get you to, where every transaction in theory can have a story unto itself. So more comprehensive solution, and if we look strategically here, having a marketing campaigns and marketing analysis, whether it's hosted page hits or campaign metrics to be able to promote, whether it's newsletters or new product offerings, being able to not only set those products up within our database, but being able to communicate them and analyzing campaign results through our sales activity. And then if we focus further into CRM sales and marketing management, being able to have a pipeline summary, being able to look at customer activities as we talked about, being able to focus in on e-commerce, and being able to have a different visualization that include new web orders and website hits and revenue and cart abandonment, all within an application that has the core fundamentals of inventory management and content management together in one cohesive system. And then as you look at the inventory and purchasing, no longer is it sufficient to have just a basic PO system. We need to have more sophisticated demand planning capabilities. We need to have item supply plans and the abilities to do forecasts of purchasing and inventory requirements, and of course being able to analyze this information. And then finally, making sure we have a robust financial metrics and reporting system, whether it's an executive summary that's achieved on a smartphone or a tablet, or being able to run reports and being able to have those dynamically emailed to business stakeholders. So as we move through, and really didn't want to focus too much on the particular attributes of any one cloud solution, and certainly just wanted to give you a flavor for the concept that these are far more robust applications encompassing deeper, richer levels of functionality without having to go through an integration process. But I thought what's really most important is for us to take a deep dive and look a little bit closer here about some of the intricacies of what the details, I should say, of the pricing. So the first thing we're looking at is on-premise business applications typical cost. And what we're seeing here, that assuming a very modest 15-user purchase, that we have a year-one cost of initial licensing acquisition, and typically most software publishers are going to have an annual subscription or enhancement plan, which spread out over 5 years might typically make an investment of about $77 or $77.5K. You'll then have some typical technical support component services associated to maintaining that. Took a very modest approach to something like that, and assuming that at some point over the 5 years, making an upgrade. Now think about what we're saying here, is that we're going to make an investment in 2016 that we're typically not going to upgrade for 5 years. Now, we may slide that number down into year 2 or year 3, and do it again in year 5 or year 6, but I wanted to take a very modest approach to doing this because I wanted to make sure that we didn't really overstate the cost of on-premise, but know that we are going to have some application costs that are going to be driven into the nature of doing an upgrade, and this is certainly very modest and does not assume the presence of any customizations. And then typically there might be a bolt-on of an analytic product, whether it's some kind of crystal reports or some kind of a Power BI solution that's going to bolt on, and you're certainly going to need some configuration and setup and then some annual services associated to that. And then you might typically bring in an integrated shipping solution, right? So if we want to have UPS and FedEx and have those freight calculations done and well maintained, we might then take a CRM subscription. We've got 10 or 12 of our associates are sales types or customer service types, and perhaps we'll do that in the cloud, and we'll need some kind of an application to support that monthly subscription, right? So we have that monthly subscription out over X number of years. Fortunately, you're not putting in necessarily a server to manage that, although you can. But typically CRM might be something you do in the cloud. But we will have an integration application that's going to have to communicate the data between the two systems. And this line is pretty important to point out, in that integration can mean a lot of different things. It could be as simple as synchronizing customer and some basic order data, or it can truly be bi-directional and around every type of business process, whether it's purchasing or collections or vendor management, as well as sales and forecasting and sales management. And then think about tying it into marketing and every other thing, and tracing the efficacy of that. This $15,000 investment in an application and services associated to bringing that to life is certainly a very, very conservative number. Potentially that could be more like $40,000 or $50,000 to truly do it the right way. Of course, then incorporating some kind of a workflow productivity solution. There's some great external products such as a product called WorkWise Business Alerts and a few others, but making a modest allocation for services and software. And then, of course, the dreaded B2B or B2C e-commerce application with, again, a modest budget for integration, right? Now, that's not to say in a cloud-based solution you might not spend some dollars in look and feel enhancement, but certainly what we find there is that tweaking a solution like a NetSuite or any of the others that are popular in the market that offer really robust e-commerce engines does not require nearly the scope of investment, especially for initial implementation, right? We're talking about finding our footing and doing some basic processing with an e-commerce platform, especially B2B. People tend to be able to want to get function over form. I think a solution like we'll show you with NetSuite provides you both. And then certainly as we look through periodic integration support services, because once you've built that integration bridge, not unreasonable to think there'll be some annual spend each year to bring that to life, bringing us down to about $333K worth of investment. And then as we look on-premise, there's also the concept of an infrastructure cost, right? So we have to think about that. We have certainly server hardware, so we bring in the solution in the first year. We're going to invest in a good SQL server or a good virtual machine, right? And then we're going to do that again in year 5. And then we're going to have an IT services firm come in and configure that server and get it ready for implementation, and we're going to do that again in year 5 because we're going to bring in a new server, and certainly that's a consideration. And frankly, whether that's 5 or 10K to make that kind of investment, who knows what it'll cost in 5 years. But that said, just a reasonable representation. And then you'll have a periodic server maintenance. And when you put in a cloud solution, it doesn't mean that you necessarily eliminate all servers on premise, but we're talking about your principal database servers, right? That which is running your mission critical applications. We're going to want to make sure that they are going to be well maintained and you're getting the periodic T&M services, and again, a rather modest projection. And then making the usual accommodations for backup costs and things like that, not to mention air conditioning, server room requirements. There was actually a study done by the Gartner Group of what it takes, and this number of $650 on an annualized basis is the cost typically to run one server. Many of these deployments that may have various different systems, as you may well know, could require the presence of multiple servers. This number can certainly grow. And then the last piece, as we look at nearly $100,000 investment in maintaining modest infrastructure, the last piece is implementing a solution that's going to afford you zero downtime, which typically means a complete replicated environment off-premise, housed somewhere, Some of my clients put it in their basements and in their homes and in as secure ways as possible. Some of them replicate it up to a cloud host facility where they're just renting infrastructure. But certainly having that, creating that scenario and having that automated failover is typically something that a cloud ERP solution is not going to require, but is going to be there as a business benefit, right? So it might not be something you're going to do, or certainly afford to do, but it is certainly something that will be available to you as a function of that type of cloud. And then finally, as we move forward, let's compare this to a cloud application environment. Right? So we take a typical ERP solution like NetSuite, which is going to include all of the supply chain and order management functionality, the financials and CRM, the e-commerce and customer portals and shipping solutions and dashboards that we showed you previously. All of that is typically going to cost about $35K per year, maybe $40K, maybe $30, but in that zone. And certainly you may spend some dollars on making the B2B e-commerce site appearance a little bit more to your liking, right? So we don't want to think that we're just going to take something like that and not have to make an investment in the appearance and look and feel of the site. We did incorporate some of those costs in the deployment or the acquisition of an e-commerce platform in the on-prem scenario. We certainly want to be fair and look at that here as a cost in the cloud situation. And there will be some technical support services. I applied the same dollar fee, although they'll be mostly directed towards application support as opposed to infrastructure support like an on-prem solution may require, but wanted to load in some of those costs, and that brings us to a cost of about $210K a year. So in summary, looking at what the typical spend might be, on-prem upfront costs are typically much, much higher. Now, none of our scenarios really account for typical training or implementation or data conversion and some of those requirements, but those should be relatively a constant. There are those who would argue on-prem may be easier or cloud may be easier, but we know that we're going to need to engage in all of those activities. So what we're seeing here is nearly a scenario where the spend of on-prem is 2 to 1 in that of cloud. And so for those reasons, I think it's worth serious consideration. Obviously, as we talked about, every situation is circumstantial, so we want to be able to look at your situation, maybe have some open dialogue to say, hey, what are these extraordinary types of business processes we need to engage in? How can we forestall the competition and really engage with our customers in a more meaningful way? And then say, how do we augment what we have on-prem? Because as a team, my organization, MyBar, can implement cloud technologies as a bolt-on to on-premise solutions, and there is an application for that. I have many, many case studies that have that kind of deployment model. But certainly, if you're thinking about making an investment in your business technology, or you just know you need to and been putting it off for a significant amount of time, maybe what we can do is help talk you through some of these potential pitfalls and uncover some of the hidden costs. And this way you can make a much more informed decision. Anyway, I didn't want to take up too much more of your time, but just so in summary, we'll see that the cloud is going to provide us with robust and continually evolving software that's going to provide more frequent updates, and most important, passive and seamless. Zero cost, zero involvement. More of your organization is going to be centralized. You'll have fewer integrations typically when doing the deployment, addressing these different areas of your business. You'll find that there's certain capabilities within cloud solutions that certainly make it much more easier to personalize and customize without the traditional source code modification you may have to encounter with on-prem deployments. And a near zero IT footprint resulting in a more predictable cost structure and certainly providing high degree of stability. On the on-premise solution, it certainly is more suitable for organizations who have a dedicated internal IT staff. If that asset is there, certainly the maintenance aspect can be thought about as a function or a percentage of the fixed overhead that those internal assets require. We're seeing a lot of on-prem solutions dealing with financials only, where organizations have wonderful cloud front-end systems or highly customized, highly, if the business process is so unique and unusual that you have to work with something that is truly an industry standard vertical solution. I get that. Then what we do there is you deploy typically on-prem such as a Microsoft Dynamics GP solution to support the financials. And then, of course, as a result, there's less frequent updates because of some of the constraints I mentioned before. So it's not really going to be as dynamic and as evolving. Again, and our business is such that we are one of the lucky few that do not have those compelling or competing market forces being applied against our business. More power to you, but certainly for businesses that do require on-prem can present some challenges there. And typically there's more integrations that's required that is sometimes offset by the perception of greater control. There are many occasions where I've worked with business owners where the thought of the cloud just is a no-no. It's just, you know, they just don't want to get involved in it. And unfortunately, they're probably more in the cloud than they realize. But certainly, as I started the conversation, we do both for a reason. And it's not necessarily right for everyone. So if you have any questions, certainly please feel free to email us. We'll look forward to getting your feedback. Hopefully you got some value out of this, and we gave you some food for thought, which is really the most important thing that we're looking to achieve here. So we thank you again for joining. Appreciate your time and attendance today, and we wish you all the best of luck in your business. Bye-bye now.